or without calamities, many parts of the Philippines are experiencing frequent power interruptions, particularly in the Mindanao region. These threaten to undo efforts at improving the region's peace and order situation, not to mention its economic standing. Mindanao's power woes have long been blamed on insufficient generating capacity. More than half the island's capacity is from aging state-owned plants. The Department of Energy admits this situation is far from over. In fact, the problem is big. The country's power deficit endangers to diminish the country's 83% total electrification rate. This number already lags behind Thailand's 88% and Vietnam's 98%. Ironically, the Philippines remains to have the highest electricity cost, 9th in the whole world. Looming power failures remain to be a threat to the country in 2015, posing an even greater threat to businesses, small and big. Secretary Petilla calls on Congress for President Aquino to be granted emergency powers in order to cure the perennial energy problems. Militant groups and power advocates blame the government's lack of action in reviewing the IPIRA law. The Electric Power Industry Reform Act was signed in 2001, privatizing some components of the power sector and opening the market for different players in the hope of getting competitive and cheaper power prices. But more than a decade, the law has yet to fulfill its promises. Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. There's a power struggle happening in the government right now, well, quite literally. Energizing the entire Philippines and ensuring that the power is cheap and reliable is a long-standing challenge of previous and the present administration. With the looming threat of power interruptions in 2015, let's check if the government has sufficient solutions. So we ask tonight, are you satisfied on how the government is addressing the energy crisis? Good evening, I'm Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. All right, joining us tonight in our discussion is Oriental Mindoro 2nd District Representative, Congressman Reynaldo Umali. Cong Ray, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Rod. Good evening, Kong Mark.
Yes, in 30 seconds, give us a summary of your position. Do you think the government is addressing the energy crisis, the power crisis?
Yes, the government is addressing it, but you see, when you talk of power problems, you talk of long-term solutions to this. Like what we are experiencing now in 2014 and probably also for next year, 2015, should have been addressed 5 or at least 5 years ago. So if we did not plan for it in 2009 or 2010 or even earlier, then this is bound to happen. But then again, in 2015, I think a lot of capacities are coming in. I just do not know if this will happen in summer of 2015 because from the pronouncements of Secretary Petilla, it looks like that we will be short of some 400 to 500 megawatts by summer of 2015. But thereafter, I think it's a green light again.
All right. On the opposing side is Pangasinan former Representative Mark Co Juanco. Good evening, Kong Mark.
Good evening, Rod. Good evening, Congressman Umali.
Right. Quickly, a summary. Your position on this debate question. Do you think the government is addressing the energy crisis?
I think there's a structural defect in our energy policy, which this government inherited from previous administrations. I don't think that our society has looked at holistically at our energy situation, and the solutions being proposed by government now are panakip-butas solutions, I think. I think there should be a shift in thinking to strategic, medium, and long-term solutions.
All right.
In 2008, I predicted this shortage to happen in 2013. And they were saying that I was inventing this for personal interest. It's here with us now. I hope that this could open the doors to a more strategic and long-term view on energy.
All right, all right. So in summary, the position of Kong Ray is that the government is doing whatever it can under the circumstances. And I think Kong Mark's position is that these are all panakip-butas solutions and we have to think of more solutions. All right, so let's start off. No? And I'll start off with a question that is very relevant to our viewers, the consumers. No? Everyone is saying that we have the most expensive, or one of the most expensive electricity costs in Asia. I think the second, right? If I'm correct, next only to Japan. Is it accurate to say it's the government's fault that we have this most expensive electricity cost?
I think it's a confluence of circumstances. No? Firstly, we have the IPERA law, which I think has failed miserably in providing timely generating capacity so that we don't have shortages. I think the price is high because precisely because demand leads supply rather than supply leading demand. I think that situation has to change structurally, policy-wise, and I think that's where the government should focus on having supply lead demand rather than the other way around.
Right. Kong Ray, do you agree? Do you agree that it's the government's fault that we have the most expensive electricity?
Well, I will not exactly agree with that. It's a confluence of events, as mentioned by Kong Mark, in the sense that, in the past, we had a lot of renewables. In particular, we had a lot of geothermal and we had a lot of hydropower that runs our power. And at that point in time, I think the energy mix was in the vicinity of about 40 renewable and 60 conventional. But now this has been diluted to about roughly about 25%. I mean, 25-75, 25 renewable and 75 conventional, mostly coal. I think the top source of power are coal in practically all areas in the country, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And coal is even cheap, I mean, relatively. But then I guess there are cheaper sources of energy, and this is what government should be looking at. I delivered a privileged speech. I was talking about another way forward, which has been probably neglected, and this is all about natural gas. We have some natural gas. It's doing us a big favor, but then we also have limited source of natural gas. In fact, Malampaya by 2024, I think, will dry up.
All right.
Actually, I'd like to react to that. No? The statement is a little bit misleading because the renewable energies Congressman O'Malley are referring to are traditional renewable sources, which are base load in nature. The renewables being discussed today, which is solar and wind, have none of the characteristics of the base load type of renewables Congressman O'Malley mentioned, which is hydro and geothermal. As a matter of fact, if they were economically viable and available, then they would have made up the bulk of the requirement of new capacity built up since that time. The reason that they are not is because, firstly, they're hard to find, they're limited resources, and they're very expensive.
You're talking about natural gas? Or
I'm talking about geothermal and hydroelectric.
Right.
And when we talk about hydroelectric, we have to distinguish between reservoir-type hydroelectric and run-of-the-river type hydroelectric. I think what Congressman O'Malley is referring to is reservoir-type hydroelectric. The sites, there are only so many sites in the Philippines, and once you've developed them, that's it.
All right, I'd like to discuss that at a point regarding renewable energy vis-a-vis, I guess, the coal and the traditional ones. But I'll focus first on this question on the government. The government regulating power. Do you think the government, Kong Mark, is regulating power efficiently? If so, in what ways?
The government is regulating power as far as the law mandates it to regulate
So in that
power.
regard, they are
And
under the law.
under the law. But there you see, obviously, the deficiency of the law. The government can only regulate so much. When the private sector under EPIRA failed to construct new generating capacity on a timely basis to avoid this crisis, the government did not step in to mandate the construction of power before the need arises.
Because they cannot.
Because
under
they
the law,
cannot,
yeah.
because under the law. They're also doing regulation, and for me, it's even making the prices of electricity more expensive. For example, they're imposing the mandates of the Renewable Energy Act, which give feed-in tariff allowance, a subsidy to renewable energies. Renewable energies, wind and solar, will not make our power more cheaper. It will make our power more expensive, and it will destabilize the grid, leading to more brownouts.
Okay, I'll ask the same question kay Kong Ray. Kong Ray, do you think the government is doing whatever it can? Of course, it's limited under the law. The NPC has its hands tied in its back. It cannot create, again, generating plants, energy generating plants.
Definitely, definitely. In fact, on what was pointed out by Kong Mark earlier about renewables, of course, there are the new approaches now or interventions now are more of solar and wind. But even in solar, even in hydro, you know, the run-of-the-river type of hydros are still
Viable? Or?
a lot. I mean, there are still a lot of potentials for this. Like, for example, in Mindoro alone, we have a potential of something like about almost 200 megawatts of hydropower, run-of-the-river type. Small hydros, no? But as of now, our hydros are our total generated capacity on hydro is, I think, about just 3 megawatts. Why did this happen? Because in the past there were so many service contracts issued by the previous administration, and you know, the electric cooperative were their hands were tied. We cannot get any other new player to come in because the service contracts are contracted to companies that did not execute their projects. And I guess this is true for many other areas in the country.
Right.
So I think, you know, there are legal issues. There are legal issues that you are confronted with if you want to really push for this run-of-the-river type.
All right.
This is something that is not too much developed in our country. Of course, the bigger hydros, they're all there, Pantabangan, Magat, etc., etc.
Right.
But this needs rehabilitation as well, and government does not have the money for that.
I need to pause at this point. No? We'll pause at that point, and we'll ask Kong Mark to interject. Meantime, we'll need to take a short break. Meanwhile, you can react online via Facebook at facebook.com/solaropposingviews or tweet your comments at opposing_views. Use the hashtag #OVEnergyCrisis. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. We have with us Oriental Mindoro 2nd District Representative Reynaldo Omali and former Pangasinan Representative Mark Cojuangco. And our debate question for tonight, are you satisfied on how the government is addressing the energy crisis? Right before the break, Kong Ray was making a point on the run-of-river generating plants, right?
Yeah, hydro.
Hydro, yeah. And Kong Mark wanted to interject
to react
something.
for the clarity of the viewing audience. By definition, run-of-river means that these are not baseload power sources.
Okay, what do you mean by baseload?
During rainy season, when the river is full, the power plant generates power. But in summer, when that river dries up or its flow decreases, there's no more power to talk about.
So base load, it's a constant
Yes,
source.
when you say base load, there's a big reservoir behind the hydro, and that supplies supposedly through the summer up to the next rainy season when the reservoir can be recharged. So runoff river is not a dependable power supply. It is an intermittent power supply. It is not base
and
load.
thus it will provide probably more problems. And
That would provide a lot of problems to the grid.
all right. All right. Our next question: Are we relying too much, Mark, on the private? And I'll ask the same question to Kong Ray. No? Are we relying too much on the private sector due to EPIRA?
Sana po kung yung EPIRA nagresulta ng, if it had resulted in private sector making the investments on a timely basis so that supply is always slightly ahead of demand, wala tayong pag-uusapan. But it is contrary to business motives, which is profit, to have supply lead demand. You always want there to be a little bit of a shortage so that your prices are maximized.
Right.
Therein lies the conflict of EPIRA. And we need to find a better way to reconcile these two opposing interests.
Right. Kong Ray, do you think we're held hostage by the EPIRA?
In a sense, yes, because that is what EPIRA is all about. It wanted to privatize power generation. In fact, it used to be Napocor in charge of power generation, but then because of the debt problems of Napocor, government was forced to privatize it and sell all the assets to the private sector for private sector.
But do you agree, though, that most people would say that, well, the EPIRA law was a self-inflicted wound. It was the government who proposed
it was
this law
a
and passed this
policy
law?
and it was a law enacted in 2001.
With the clamor of the private sector.
Yes.
All right.
And
Okay.
also because of the debt problem, because no
So we didn't have a
matter-
choice at the time.
We did not have a choice because no matter what, how we want NPC to produce more power, it cannot simply raise the revenues and the monies for that. And in 2001, I think we just came from a financial crisis in 1998. So the confluence of events forced government
I quite
to
disagree
do
with that.
Yeah. Yes.
Rod.
Mark.
Because at the end of the day, it's the consumer that pays for all capital. And in the case of the private sector, when the private sector invests, it has to borrow that capital, so there's interest cost. It has to put a profit on that capital, so there's profit. At the end of the day, it's the consumer that pays. In other countries, there are ways that they do to get the capital from the consumer and then build the plant. A case in point is Florida.
Right.
No? And we're doing it today in the Philippines with a losing proposition in the RE law. We are providing fit all. We are collecting from the consumer an amount, subsidizing fit all for renewable energies, which are non-solutions and will actually make the price of power more expensive. So we're doing this for a money-losing proposition.
Let us just go back to EPIRA. As I said, it's a law, and it is something that the government has to live by. There was a law that mandated...
Can we come up with another law, though, to repeat
Exactly.
I did file a bill to amend EPIRA. You know, of course, as I said, just going back, 2001, there was a law. I don't know how our policymakers, our executive, and our legislature arrived at a consensus to pass that law. Probably they did not look beyond. And worst is EPIRA from 2001 up to now, I think has not been really assessed as to its efficacy and effectiveness. And the problem was privatization of the assets came too much later on. I think it only started in 2007 or 2008. And then, of course, there were all these concerns of private sector that, hey guys, government is not privatizing, so they did not want to come in. This is not to mention the very tedious process for obtaining a PSA or power supply agreement. or power sales agreement.
So,
you have to go through a process which requires 165 signatures.
So
if I am the private sector wanting to use my money, putting up the desired capacity and going through this process, I would rather not.
Yeah.
And so these are the things that, because of the length of time that EPIRA was left alone
But theoretically,
to implement,
go ahead,
no
Mark.
problem, no program to support it, then we have this problem in 2014.
Bottom line is that the assessment has been made. EPIRA has failed, and we are living the effects of the failure of EPIRA today in this crisis and in the high prices we pay. I think cheap electricity prices will affect the whole economy, not just a sector of the economy. So if you ask the private sector, what part of the private sector are you talking about? The power generating part of the private sector? I think the whole private sector would be happy if you found a way to lower electricity prices and prevent power crisis in the future. So I think we need to find a way to finance the power plants that need to be built between now and 2030, because by 2030 we need to double our power supply.
But the argument then was that if we had the private sector there, then they'll compete. You know, the natural forces of
that's the whole
economy
point.
would-
I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating,
And it hasn't
and the result has been that it has failed spectacularly.
All right. Well, partly because the government has provided all of these requirements for them to get the PSA and all that.
That's one
also.
of the problems
So-
also, and the incentives that you give
I really
government.
think that's a cop-out.
All right. Now, do you think the NPC and the Department of Energy are in effect inutile in a way, useless?
Their hands are
because of-
tied by law
Yeah.
and also by closed minds. There are alternatives, generating technologies that would allow us to have very cheap power. One of them is nuclear. I mean,
We'll discuss that for
the
sure.
biggest alternative is nuclear, but that's off the table right now. I think that this government should really look at that, because that can change the outlook for energy in the Philippines for the next 30 years.
I'd like to discuss that later on. but yeah.
Let me just interject on the. I am chairman of Committee on Energy only in 2013. Okay, so I'm just probably about
A year old?
less than a year
Okay.
in the Committee on Energy, and in fact, we have done a review of the EPIRA, and in fact, I already have filed a House bill that seeks to amend the pertinent provisions of EPIRA. In fact, I cannot understand why private sector, the generating group, is even opposed to these EPIRA amendments. But when I talked with them in a meeting, they said that they have no objections to any of the provisions contained in my bill, except that they fear of certain uncertainties that may arise if I touch on the EPIRA. So they would rather not
touch it.
and just let EPIRA proceed. So, I am trying to weigh things. I cannot as yet say that EPIRA is a failure because I think it is still a work in progress.
But how long can we wait, though, right?
But then there are special or strategic actions that we need, and I have covered that in the bill that I filed to amend the PIRA.
Okay. Now we need to take a short break more on the issue of addressing the country's power crisis when we return. Opposing views. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Still with us, Oriental Mindoro 2nd District Representative Reynaldo Umali and former Pangasinan Representative Mark Cojuangco. And our question, are you satisfied on how the government is addressing the energy crisis? Now, yes, go
To add, in 2015, something like about 1,118 megawatts of power plus another indicative of 588 megawatts for a total of 1,700 megawatts are coming in.
In 2015.
In 2015, but probably this will come in second half of 2015. So there are investments coming in, except that it's not coming in timely.
Right now.
So
this is part of your argument that the government is doing its part.
Yes, and for the rest of the year until 2023, there are a lot of committed projects, except that, of course,
But I have a
it
problem.
takes time to build a power plant.
All right, Koma.
Yes,
You
I
have a problem
agree
with
it takes time to build a power plant, but I still have problems with that statement because the power plants that are committed today are more of the same. Meaning if we have high power prices today, we're just building more of the same kind of high power priced plants that will tie us for another 40 to 60 years until they break down and need to be replaced to a higher price regimen.
We're not solving the
We're not
price
solving
problem.
the underlying problem of high power prices. Nuclear power can deliver power at less than half the price wholesale of coal. One of the big issues that coal is expensive in the Philippines is that the coal emanates from another country or from another island. It has to be shipped by boat to where it is used. And when shipping becomes scarce, the cost of shipping can equal the cost of the coal. And so we are tied to two variables, the cost of shipping and the cost of the coal itself. Whereas nuclear, for a whole year supply, you're talking of a small airplane can bring the whole fuel for a whole year for a nuclear
Since
plant.
we're on that topic, are you...
Freight is not an issue when it comes to nuclear fuel.
Since we're on that topic, I guess you're referring to the Bataan nuclear plant.
Not only the Bataan nuclear. The Bataan nuclear plant is just the quickest way for the government to open the nuclear doors in the country.
Do you think that's correct, Ray?
I am not sure about that. I do not know if it is practicable to go for it at this point in time. I do not know whether we still have that infrastructure, both human and other infrastructure to run it. I do not know if we still have the experts to run it, because this was planned in the 70s.
70s, yeah.
Built in the 70s, and I do not know what else you need to make this operational. So I'm sure Kong Mark has a lot of things to say on this. Unfortunately, I'm not
that's my
versed on that.
That's my whole point, po. No? Watch Bar 2 in the United States is about the same era as Bataan nuclear plant. They're only going to start it up now, and it was less completed when they started commissioning it. Then BNPP is much less completed. I've been inviting the key personalities in the energy industry, including the good chairman, to visit Bataan nuclear plant, to listen to the arguments for nuclear power in the Philippines. But they have not.
All right.
They have not come.
This is a whole topic altogether. We did discuss that in the previous episode. But anyway, just shifting gears. Do you agree? And there's this discussion that, or this proposition that President Aquino should be granted emergency powers to solve the power crisis. Do you agree with this proposition?
My big question for that would be, to do what? If it's to enter power purchase agreements like what happened in the past administration of President Ramos, we all know how distasteful it was after. Are we going to do the same thing again? So are we going to guarantee high kuryente prices for decades to come? Or is the emergency power to look into other sources, like say nuclear, to open the doors for that, to amend EPIRA, to give the government more teeth in saying, okay, we need the plant built now, even if there is no investor willing to put the money in right now, then maybe yes. But if it's just to issue power purchase agreements, I think that's just another stopgap solution.
All right. Kongray, do you think that the president should be given emergency powers?
Well, as of this time, the president has not made that request. As pointed out by Kong Mark, we have to know the parameters for this anticipated or perceived request for emergency powers. And I would agree with Kong Mark that the terms and conditions should be spelled out in any request to be made to Congress for a joint resolution from both houses of Congress. But then, I think the emergency power, if I read or if I hear the Secretary of Energy correctly, it is to address that gap of 2 months of rotating brownouts for about 1 to 2 hours with some other scenarios, and a worse scenario in case of you know, El Nino. I think that is only limited to that point.
Because Energy Secretary Pitillas did say that his department, without the emergency powers for the president, couldn't guarantee that there would be no brownouts next year. So, do you think that DOE has become powerless under the circumstances that we have?
Well, I'm open to other options. I would not like to just pin
yes
it
no.
on just one option. I think there can be a lot of options, which will not be burdensome to the people. Like, for example, of course, this is more difficult to do. Conservation is one. Like, if we are short of about 400 to 500 megawatts of power by summer of 2015, that 2-month window, I don't know if we will really be able to just try to focus on conserving energy at 11,000 megawatts of demand for Luzon. If you save 10%, that's about 1,100 megawatts, and that will even be more. That will even be better for the people because they will have less electricity rates to consume and therefore to pay. So I think there are other options. But if the option is just what to say lease a genset, diesel genset, because this is you know, the quick fix, then I think we need to explore as many options as we could.
Going to that, though, hypothetically, if let's say the president had emergency powers, and could he just say, all right, let's turn on the BNPP? Can it start in the next?
It needs 4 years. It needs three years of validation and commissioning, which means it has to go through what it went through already before, because it already reached the stage of OSAC 2, where it was cleared by the IAEA to load nuclear fuel. But that has to be revisited, redone. Okay,
it takes 3 years.
And then it takes 1 year to start it up. So that's a total.
So in terms of short-term solution, it doesn't provide.
But that's the same amount of time needed to build a brand new coal plant. So, but you're going to end up generating power at less than half the price of a brand new coal plant. So BNPP is a bargain, and it's a quick entry into nuclear power. But I want to disagree with the good chairman when he mentioned about us conserving. Because if you look at our per capita consumption of electricity, we are at the bottom of the totem pole. We are poor people. We are 150th the American per capita consumption, 125th South Korea, 1/10 Malaysia's per capita consumption. We're already at the bottom. You want us to save more money? I think we need to reduce the price so that our people can even consume more. Because consumption of electricity determines standard of living. So if you want us to be richer people, you have to we have to have the means to consume more. And the means to consume more is to lower the price.
I would like to again interject. When I say conservation, I'm not talking about the small consumers. I'm talking of strategic approaches like industries that eat heavy power. Then you get them to
But we don't have industries anymore because they left the country precisely because power was too expensive. They went to Malaysia, Indonesia.
I will disagree with that, Mark, that we do not have any more industries. I'm sure there are still manufacturing and so on and so forth. Probably they have left us because of, I agree, higher power rates, and I agree with you that we need to fulfill the promise of EPIRA of reasonable price and sufficient power. But then, at this point in time, it's not coming, and we have an impending crisis.
Are you for the nationalization of the power industry? Where do you stand on that, Congress?
I don't think we have to go back to where we came from, which is Napocor. I am no believer that government can do this effectively and efficiently. I think it will be better off in the hands of the private sector, but we have to regulate it properly.
Kong Mark, your position on that? Where do you stand on
I'm
that?
mixed on that. If you take the French model, where they own practically 100% of the power generating industry in France, they have the lowest power rates in Europe. They have the lowest grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. If you look at South Korea, 80% of the power industry there is owned by the government in partnership with the private sector. Maybe that's a good compromise model for us to follow, with the beneficial ownership going to the consumers. So whatever efficiencies or profits the power sector make, it redounds to the benefit of the consumers. I think low electricity prices eventually affect the whole economy. So a rising tide lifts all ships, all businesses prosper with cheap electricity.
Now, let's quickly, let's go through the, there was a proposition, of course, by Representative Teddy Casino and his group that we should really explore more renewable energy. And you did say earlier that there's some forms of renewable energy that are not efficient.
Well, solar and wind power, for one, are intermittent sources. You don't know when the wind is going to stop blowing, and every day the sun goes down. So in the evenings, and when the wind isn't blowing, you need the conventional power plants to act as backup for these renewable energy sources. And since now you're not asking them to operate full-time, you're only asking them to operate part-time inefficiently, and more costly, you are actually increasing the cost of conventional power. So it is self-defeating. And if you remove the subsidies from these energy sources, none of them are economically viable.
All right. We need to take a short break. Don't go away. When we come back, the results of our online poll on the issue and the final words of our guests. Stay tuned. You're watching Opposing Views. Welcome back. This is Opposing Views. I'm Nepomuceno, and our guests, Oriental Mindoro 2nd District Representative Reynaldo Umali and former Pangasinan Representative Mark Cojuangco. And our debate question for tonight, are you satisfied on how the government is addressing the energy crisis? Right before the break, we were talking to Congressman Mark about renewable energy, and he made some points, especially with regards to solar and hydro. Those are inefficient in a way. They shouldn't be something that we should really consider.
Reservoir hydro is efficient. Run-of-river hydro is not. Wind is not.
And
solar is not.
All right. Your take on that, because Representative Teddy Casino is bringing this up, no? And we should really be exploring this because they're supposed to be easier, safer to build. They don't cause pollution, and etc. So, what are your thoughts, Congressman Ray?
Well, I am inclined to look into it, because for me, anything indigenous is better for the Philippines, because I think we need the import substitution type of policies on power. If we will always rely on conventional and or fossil fuel based, definitely we will never fulfill the promise of a PIRA of keeping the prices low. So I am open to initiatives that will tend to bring in more investments on this, because there are other advantages like employment, livelihood, and other opportunities apart from the investment that we can that will may bring about by the influx of investments on renewables.
All right. And therein lies a lot of fallacy in the promise of the renewables. He said less dependence on imports. But when you do renewables like solar and wind, you're importing the energy, the cost of the energy for the next 20 years upfront.
All right.
Right? So none of these are made here. The solar panels are imported, the windmills are imported.
You have to.
And so instead of paying for it as you need it, like coal or whatever other fuel, you're paying for all of this upfront.
All this expensive equipment.
All in the beginning.
All right.
But also,
yes.
in the long run, you don't use any more. I mean, the cost of operation will be much, much lower too. So anyway, I am not prepared to debate on this because I have not gone
I'm
into
prepared to debate
renewable versus nuclear. In fact, we have a bigger challenge when you talk of nuclear because you have to get the sense of the people. I'm sure, I do not know if Mark here has gone the rounds, but in the Committee on Energy, as I said, I would want to get the 16th Congress to decide on the fate of Bataan nuclear power plant and nuclear as a direction for power.
Because the main concern is
Which is a failure of government, which he has just mentioned. You would think that it would be government, the DOE, and those in the know that would make the effort and put the budget to educate the public on the realities of nuclear and the other energy sources. Nothing. Not a single expenditure in time and effort and resources in educating the public of the validity of the choices available.
all right.
That's why, Rod, that's what I'm saying. I am just in the 15th Congress. Kong Mark was there for a long time. He has filed bills. I do not know what happened to these bills that he filed. And so is Kimi, you know. But what I'm saying is that as chair of the Committee on Energy, I would like to
Listen, you would like to take a look
talk
at
to
it.
the people and find out
Well,
what really are your sentiments on this.
Fukushima happened, and we have to talk about Fukushima.
Yeah, I think that's the fear of most people
Yes.
regarding nuclear. No,
Well,
Fukushima
it
happened.
will take another of a segment of your show.
Yes.
But I think that from what I've learned about Fukushima strengthens rather than weakens the case for nuclear power and its safety. And this has to be disseminated to the people. We have to debate this in public before the people can decide rationally what is the right thing for
Because
them.
when Fukushima happened, there was a lot of fear, and many people were concerned that, all right, the leak, that's what's going to happen. We don't even know if Fukushima is safe now.
In short, not a single person has died of radiation in Fukushima. Not a single person has been injured. But over 20,000 people died by drowning. But if you ask anybody, they think people there died because of radiation. So there's a big fallacy there. That has to be disseminated.
So that was unfounded fear. Because right after...
There's a lot of unfounded fear and manufactured FUD, F-U-D. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
And why is it? Why all these questions? When in fact, as you mentioned, no one has ever died of radiation just because they're very near a nuclear plant.
No, exactly. Because
Yeah.
I think of the decades of misinformation. Tragically, in the United States, majority of the American people, where we inherited our anti-nuclear sentiment from, are now pro-nuclear. They accept nuclear power as part of their energy future. They're building new nuclear plants in America, and we're stuck in the 70s mindset. We need to grow beyond that. We need to learn and grow beyond that.
How much for energy gap or a power gap will be solved if, let's say, we commission BNPP today?
7% of the Luzon grid could be. There would be no crisis problem in 2015 if BNPP was running today. If we had started in 2010, BNPP would be running today. Wala tayong pinag-uusapang crisis.
All right. Now, let's talk about the energy crisis.
Let me
Yes, go
just
ahead.
interject. You know, of course, I'm not prepared to debate with Mark on, as I said, nuclear.
Nuclear, no?
That is what he found out. I do not know if other sectors had already taken that view. But of course, when you talk of nuclear, no one dies instantaneously of radiation. It takes time. I do not know if there are empirical facts already that had been circularized about all of these things. No? But again, let us think Filipino.
Yeah, but do you think
Let us think Filipino in the sense that, we are, in the Philippines, we are a doubting nation.
Yeah.
We are a nation that really opposes any other things that one side would like to push for. And this is the bigger challenge for us, just trying to get
everyone together on the same
the
page?
sentiment of the people, the majority of the people to go for this is already a challenge. I'm not yet talking about the technicalities of nuclear power, and then we have the Constitution, we have the Makabayan, and we have
The
everything.
Constitution mandates us to pursue nuclear power because it mandates us to use nuclear power for peaceful means for the benefit of the people. It's in the Constitution. What the Constitution bars is the use of nuclear technology for weapons and for war. But for peaceful uses of nuclear power, of nuclear technology,
Mark, we are
the
both-
Constitution mandates us to do it.
Mark, we are both legislators. The Constitution has mandated many other things other than nuclear. And a lot of these things that we are mandated to do are not even happening. In fact, there are even laws that are yet to be issued, like political dynasties and the like, that are yet to be put into law. So, of course, that mandate is a mandate as general as it could be.
This administration and this president should use his moral ascendancy and his popularity to bring the truth to the people. Let the people decide. But show them what's happening in these other
But you will, agree
is
that,
why,
you will agree that nuclear is not a popular proposition, right?
In the Philippines, yes, but in other countries, it's very popular.
Then
So-
let's implement it in other countries.
No,
but
the point is,
what I'm saying,
we should stop wasting katas OFW, having to buy fuel that we just burn every year. We should use that katas OFW as capital to develop our country. And the biggest savings of nuclear power for this country is foreign exchange.
anyway,
Yes, Congress.
as I was saying, there will be a venue for this. In fact, I don't know if Kimi or Kimi had already filed a bill on this. We will calendar this for discussion.
We declared a moratorium on our bill because of Fukushima. But to try to say that we are going to tuldok BNPP without knowing the conclusion of what's going to happen in Japan is premature. Why is the congressman so hell-bent on eliminating BNPP as a future option for future administrations
I
to
did not
solve
say that.
our energy crisis?
I did not say that, Mark.
All right. Well,
I said that when I say I will make tuldok to nuclear, we will discuss it, we will call for public hearings, and we will decide based on
right.
the
Consensus, okay.
the consensus.
all right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Final words, Congre, your final words on this to our viewers.
Well, I have delivered a privileged speech sometime in June to really look at the energy sector, and I did want and I did make a proposition to revolutionize the energy sector, because after EPIRA in 2001, I think that our power sector has gone a different direction. From the promise of sufficient and afford, or rather reasonable price, I think the prices now are no way reasonable, and our power is insufficient from what has been happening lately, where you have brownouts in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So, but I'm not saying though that EPIRA has failed us because it is, I guess, still a work in progress. Because in the first 9 or 10 years of EPIRA, I think government was unable to really turn the investments to get power generation to come in, so that we will have a supply-driven, not demand-driven power situation.
All right.
But then I don't want to just limit ourselves to power, because I think even in 1998, under the downstream oil deregulation law, nothing has happened to the oil industry in the sense that it promised a environmentally friendly fuel and a reasonable rate also, fairly priced fuel. But again, this downstream oil deregulation law probably did not work the way it should. Right. And so when I delivered that privileged speech, I was looking at other options. I was looking farther in terms of looking at other options. You know, I'm just so amazed why Singapore, a tiny state in ASEAN, in the ASEAN, can be a major player in oil.
Yeah. Okay.
And using the human resources, the Filipinos, our experts. Right. And Philippines cannot. When we are more strategic and we have resources.
Yeah. Okay, Kong.
How can that be? I think there is a way forward, and government has probably not looked into it, and this is what I proposed in my privilege speech.
All right, thank you very much, Congressman Ray. Kong Mark, your final words?
Yes, sa akin pong palagay, nag-fail po ang EPIRA to have power generating new build on a timely basis. Yun po ang keyword doon, timely basis. Wala pa po dito ang kakulangan, nandyan na po, ginagawa na po ang planta na maglilikha ng kuryente. Tatlo lang po ang major choice po natin sa mainstream na baseload kuryente pagdating sa pagkamura. Nandyan na po ang coal, nandyan po ang gas, nandyan po ang nuclear. Ang nuclear po ang pinakamura sa lahat na ito by more than 100%, more than half, 120%. And kung ayaw po natin ng nuclear, dapat po coal or gas ang puntahan natin. Wala na po tayong ibang choice. Be aware that coal and gas is global warming. It emits a lot of carbon dioxide. So hindi po natin sinosolve ang ating kalikasan. Only nuclear can do that. Sana po pag-isipan po ni Chairman Umali ang pag-convert ng BNPP to coal or gas. Dahil po meron pong study yan nung panahon ni President Ramos, ang METS Engineering Corporation study, na tumututol po sa pag-convert ng BNPP. Sa dinami-dami po ng coal plant at gas plant site sa Luzon, bakit po kailangan ipuntiriya ang BNPP? Mali naman klaseng turbina ang nandun para gawing coal or gas. Kailangan din naman gumawa ng boiler na malaki para magkaroon. So why not buy your gas turbine, locate it in an existing coal or gas plant, and build the new plant that you want to build there. Do not despoil BNPP as an option for future administrations and our society to solve our long-term energy needs.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman Mark. And thanks to our guests, Oriental Mindoro 2nd District Representative Reynaldo Omali, and of course, former Pangasinan Representative Mark Cojuangco. And now let's feel the pulse of our viewers through our online poll. Our question, are you satisfied on how the government is addressing the energy crisis? Those who said yes, 35%, and those who said no, 65%. And that's our opposing views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion of today's most relevant issues. I'm Nepomuceno. Good night. God bless. Happy weekend.
With or without calamities, many parts of the Philippines are experiencing frequent power interruptions, particularly in the Mindanao region. These threaten to undo efforts at improving the region's peace and order situation, not to mention its economic standing. Mindanao's power woes have long been blamed on insufficient generating capacity. More than half the island's capacity is from aging state-owned plants. The Department of Energy admits this situation is far from over. In fact, the problem is big. The country's power deficit endangers to diminish the country's 83% total electrification rate. This number already lags behind Thailand's 88% and Vietnam's 98%. Ironically, the Philippines remains to have the highest electricity cost, 9th in the whole world. Looming power failures remain to be a threat to the country in 2015, posing an even greater threat to businesses, small and big. Secretary Petilla calls on Congress for President Aquino to be granted emergency powers in order to cure the perennial energy problems. Militant groups and power advocates blame the government's lack of action in reviewing the IPIRA law. The Electric Power Industry Reform Act was signed in 2001, privatizing some components of the power sector and opening the market for different players in the hope of getting competitive and cheaper power prices. But more than a decade, the law has yet to fulfill its promises.
Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's...
There are cheaper sources of energy, and this is what government should be looking at. I delivered a privileged speech. I was talking about another way forward, which has been probably neglected, and this is all about natural gas. We have some natural gas. It's doing us a big favor, but then we also have limited source of natural gas. In fact, Malampaya by 2024, I think will dry up.
All right.
Actually, I'd like to react to that. No? The statement is a little bit misleading because the renewable energies Congressman O'Malley are referring to are traditional renewable sources, which are base load in nature. The renewables being discussed today, which is solar and wind, have none of the characteristics of the base load type of renewables Congressman O'Malley mentioned, which is hydro and geothermal. As a matter of fact, if they were economically viable and available, then they would have made up the bulk of the requirement of new capacity built up since that time. The reason that they are not is because, firstly, they're hard to find, they're limited resources, and they're very expensive.
You're talking about natural gas? Or
I'm talking about geothermal and hydroelectric.
Right.
And when we talk about hydroelectric, we have to distinguish between reservoir-type hydroelectric and run-of-the-river type hydroelectric. I think what Congressman O'Malley is referring to is reservoir-type hydroelectric. The sites, there are only so many sites in the Philippines, and once you've developed them, that's it.
All right, I'd like to discuss that at a point regarding renewable energy vis-a-vis, I guess, the coal, this most expensive electricity
I think
cost?
it's a confluence of circumstances. No? Firstly, we have the IPIRA law, which I think has failed miserably in providing timely generating capacity so that we don't have shortages. I think the price is high because precisely because demand leads supply rather than supply leading demand. I think that situation has to change structurally, policy-wise, and I think that's where the government should focus on having supply lead demand rather than the other way around.
Right. Kong Ray, do you agree? Do you agree that it's the government's fault that we have the most expensive electricity?
Well, I will not exactly agree with that. It's a confluence of events, as mentioned by Kong Mark, in the sense that, in the past, we had a lot of renewables. In particular, we had a lot of geothermal, and we had a lot of hydropower that runs our power. And And at that point in time, I think the energy mix was in the vicinity of about 40 renewable and 60 conventional. But now this has been diluted to about roughly about 25%. I mean, 25, 75, 25
For
renewable and 75 conventional, mostly coal. I think the top source of power are coal in practically all areas in the country, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And coal is even cheap. I mean, relatively. But then I guess
The most pressing issues. There's a power struggle happening in the government right now, well, quite literally. Energizing the entire Philippines and ensuring that the power is cheap and reliable is a long-standing challenge of previous and the present administration. With the looming threat of power interruptions in 2015, let's check if the government has sufficient solutions. So we ask tonight, are you satisfied on how the government is addressing the energy crisis? Good evening, I'm Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. All right, joining us tonight in our discussion is Oriental Mindoro 2nd District Representative, Congressman Reynaldo Umali. Cong Ray, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Rod. Good evening, Kong Mark.
Yes, in 30 seconds, give us a summary of your position. Do you think the government is addressing the energy crisis, the power crisis?
Yes, the government is addressing it, but you see, when you talk of power problems, you talk of long-term solutions to this. Like what we are experiencing now in 2014 and probably also for next year, 2015, should have been addressed at least 5 years ago. So if we did not plan for it in 2009 or 2010 or even earlier, then this is bound to happen. But then again, in 2015, I think a lot of capacities are coming in. I just do not know if this will happen in summer of 2015 because from the pronouncements of Secretary Petilla, it looks like that we will be short of some 400 to 500 megawatts by summer of 2015. But thereafter, I think it's a green light again.
All right. On the opposing side is Pangasinan former Representative Mark Cojuangco. Good evening, Kong Mark.
Good evening, Rod. Good evening, Congressman Umali.
Right. Quickly, a summary. Your position on this debate question. Do you think the government is addressing the energy crisis?
I think there's a structural defect in our energy policy, which this government inherited from previous administrations. I don't think that our society has looked at holistically at our energy situation, and the solutions being proposed by government now are panakip-butas solutions, I think. I think there should be a shift in thinking to strategic, medium, and long-term solutions.
All right.
In 2008, I predicted this shortage to happen in 2013, and they were saying that I was inventing this for personal interest. It's here with us now. I hope that this could open the doors to a more strategic and long-term view on energy.
All right. So in summary, the position of Kong Ray is that the government is doing whatever it can under the circumstances. And I think Kong Mark's position is that these are all panakip-butas solutions and we have to think of more solutions. All right, so let's start off. And I'll start off with a question that is very relevant to our viewers, the consumers. Everyone is saying that we have the most expensive, or one of the most expensive electricity costs in Asia. I think the second, right? If I'm correct, next only to Japan. Is it accurate to say it's the government's fault that we have